to introduce our featured poet, John Tyndall.
Thank you very much, Tom. It is an incredible pleasure for me to introduce John B. Lee. He's one of my dearest friends. I've known him as of this year for 45 years. And he's Canada's greatest poet. He was born in 1951 in Highgate, Kent County, on a farm. And because of that, he was exposed to hard work, for one thing, the round of the seasons, nature, birth, death, everything that could be fodder for great poetry. The family farm, the Lee's family farm, 5 generations on the same place. I was looking at a book at Weldon Library where I worked called Place Names in Ontario, because I couldn't remember which county Highgate was in, so I found out that it was in Kent County. And I read through the description of the place and some of the people who lived there, and one of the lines was that Big John Lee made a very good living raising cattle and sheep. And I'm guessing that was your great-great-grandfather? Great-grandfather. So that'd be Herb's father?
Yes.
So John was in a family that had been on the land in the same place for 5 generations. And what did he do? He turned his back on farming and became a teacher and a poet. He married his wife, Kathy Lee. Both of them were teachers. I think the most honorable profession ever. And eventually, John retired from teaching and wrote poetry full time. Back when we were students, we noticed that every year there would be an Irving Layton book. And we'd read it, and as the years went by, there would be less and less great poetry in it. And we used to laugh and say, he needs an editor. Maybe he should put out a book every 3 years or 5 years. Well, since John quit teaching and started writing full-time, he would have more than 1 book a year, almost, right? At least 1, sometimes 2. But for me, there has never been a bad John B. Lee book of poetry, or any other book that he's written, whether it's prose or poetry. All of them are great books. He has an amazing range of things that he writes about. He looks at both those things that delight us and those things that appall us. And he's able to write it with beauty and insight every time. I want to have you join your hands together for John B. Lee.
Stan Dragon said to me, here a book, there a book, everywhere a book, book. As Stan was talking and giving his energy to this room and to events like this, I found myself grateful, and I also remembered something that I hadn't thought of in a very long while. Back in about 1973, I ran a poetry reading series at the Vic Tavern in a room called the Bucket of Blood, and I can tell you that somehow I was a lot more confident then than I am now. The older I get, the more poetry that I write, the more nervous I get. I thought it would be the other way around. I thought I would come to a point where, okay, I can rest on some of my laurels, but that isn't the case with my personality. Anyway, so when Stan told me I had to hold a microphone, I thought of breaking the song a la Frank Sinatra, but I don't think I'll do that. My mother says, when my mother's in an old folks home now, and I read one poem about her near the end, and she has Alzheimer's, but the one thing she remembers is songs, and she breaks into song, and then I'll give her a verse of music. I'll sing a verse of music for her, and my mother will look at me very quizzically and said, "Who told you you could sing?" So I always like to start off with very new things, and I was in Peru a couple of weeks ago, and while I was there, I was feeling very inspired by the landscape, but not inspired to write. And I found myself wondering, will I write about this place? And then when I got back, I've written a number of things. This first piece is called Lalo's Walls. Lalo was a tour guide, a retired anthropology professor, and he mentioned a rather silly book by Eric von Daniken called Chariots of the Gods. It was published maybe 30 years ago, and it has a silly thesis that ancient people were not equipped the way we are, and they must have been visited by extraterrestrials who built the buildings. And so Lalo mentioned Eric von Daniken, and I think of the group, I was the only one who had actually read that book, and I remember throwing it across the room a couple of times while I was reading it, because it was essentially a really silly book. Anyway, this poem is called Lalo's Walls, and it's about the architecture of Peru and of the Incan people. Lalo's Walls. The proud Peruvian professor of anthropology, our tour guide Lalo, perseverates on the quality of Incan architecture, pointing at the perfection of the walls in Machu Picchu, walls at Ollantaytambo, walls at Rachi. Everywhere the great stones fit at the seams and joints like a leavening of bread loaf rising together, some carved from granite, some carved from volcanic rock, basalt black and brought from close at hand quarries, some from far valleys. What wonders he reveals of the ancient world as he places a reverent palm on the big-bellied curve of a single seam, tracing the line of the bond with the tip of his nail, like the natural path of a bead of rain. What a marvel, he says. See how they interlock where they fit. This amazing masonry, crafted. I'm going to have to put it down. My hand is shaking. This amazing masonry crafted by the lost art of ancestors, knowing the solstice of the season, training its light through the notch of a mountain for the god of the sun and the god of the moon, caressing these lintels like a lover's warm hand. He is imploring us to pay attention, studied attention, to the distant past. He wants us to see where the interstices held, even as the earth trembled and scree boiled down from the broken slopes of the high mountains. These walls stayed, stronger even than the monuments of memory preserved by breath in story, while we stand and move, performing the work of walking shadows, timing the ephemeral darkness of a single day. I've led a very privileged life, and I've been in every continent except for Antarctica and Australia. Last year I was in China, and I thought while I was on the theme of walls that I would read the poem about walking the Great Wall of China. I have an aunt, a wonderful aunt who's now passed away, but she went to China. And I said, Aunt Emily, you've been to the Great Wall of China. Give me your impression. And she said, quite simply, it was very long. Climbing the Great Wall of China. I climbed the stairs to where the Great Wall breaks its spine along the gray-green ridge of smoke and fog above the Yanshan Mountains. And as I rise, I carry nothing more than the shadow's weight of daily cares. And as I glance, I'm amazed to see how worn away by walking are the stones beneath my feet. How smooth the zoe by water over time, and leather trod, eroded by the come and go of hordes of trekking solitudes. And as I touch a single shape of chiseled rock, I feel the slave's fardel, the spirit burden of a broken life, the fragment of an ephemeral fear, the horse's heavy heartbeat of a warring earth, the blackened hoof that thunders on the steppe with arrows singing in the mind of troubled dreams. I pause to let a lucky tourist take a photograph. His friend leans, smiling as she breathes, to catch her breath. Her bosom heaves, alive, alive, and lets it go. I'm warm enough to wait a while. My quickened pulse is like my father at my morning door. It knocks to wake an answer from my over-weary bones. And if he's there or not, I rise and seek the purchase of a greater height than this. So I decided to follow that with a poem very close to home. I now live in Port Dover in a lake house, and this poem is about canoeing on Lake Erie on a calm day when there was yellow algae bloom floating on the lake. And I noticed it in my path, and I noticed it in my wake, and then we stood on the cliff overlooking the lake talking together with friends about it. This is called In My Lonesome Craft. From my lonesome craft I see the luminous surface of the still bay, shining an indefinable green, undulant and wimpled like the heat gray cooling of burnt steel, unscrolling in blue light, and everywhere dappled by the inconsistent chiaroscuro of an indecisive sun on this cool, warm, shadow-active day, where I am buoyed by the boat stain of my slow reflection moving to the hollow knock and drag at the drip edge of my paddle. I let myself glide and glance and look and watch and sometimes see the yellow spackling of butter-colored single-cell algae bloom coagulating as a swirling river meandering in the proof of my wake like the oil of thought words might change our thinking by. And in the afterglow of my lazy hour on the lake, I stand with neighbors on the cliff rim at the overlook, and we discuss the chemical trace line seeming a sulfurous corruption ghosting the keel cut of the stern of my long canoe coming this way home from the harbor. We are defining how we might comprehend by shallow touch the briefest momentary meaning of the heart beneath the bone, holding a palm line to the dark drum of our own and only unseen and unseeable self. Wondering also how in the deeper regions the sand bed might know the presence of the light as being there beyond the reach of light. We're in what downwells as warmth also washes the shore shells and dimples the sand by weeping away from splash like rain worry of a failing storm. I am this opaque vessel, this rock-bellied vase, this volume dropping its thirst through a long silence to a quiet promise where this voice becomes a dry companion to what the water says. So I go from home to Cuba, and when I was in Cuba, I was in the city of Holguin, and in Holguin, in the center of Holguin, there is a cross, and as we walked up to the cross, my friend Manuel Leon said to us, "So, this is a place of places." And I realized that he'd just given me the gift of a great phrase. And I also think that there are places. You know when you're there. You know when you're standing. And it might not be a famous place. It might just be somewhere on the earth that's sacred. And when you stand there, you feel a great sense of belonging. You vanish into the thing itself. You vanish into the grace of being alive somewhere. So this poem is called "So This is a Place of Places," and it's about taking a walk down through the nuisance ground away from the cross, because you can go up a set of stairs, you can go up a road, or you can go through the dump on your way down into the neighborhood. So this is a place of places. We climb the 400 steps to the cross of Holguin, and Manuel says, "So this is a place of places." And we stand above the city looking east, where the sun is laving the neighborhood and staining the squares, like the light lacquering of old wood for the restoration of a much-loved dollhouse village. Another day we descend to the west, following a crumbled trail down the green stone pathway knobbed with bone and broken glass and ancient coral from the sea. We are coming down to the nuisance ground with its frail rust and tin aromas, its pungent swill of vegetative rot and paper scuttle sounds. When I see the gyre of ravens hovering and circling over the blackened body of a bent-ribbed dog, disarticulated by maggot work and the carrion hunger of those scavenging shadows. As I pass, I look down and take in the final sneer of Canis domesticus, many days dead, and I think of the night with its tongue of stars and the sorrowful solitude of that morbid moment of his passing. That full exhale of his final lying down, and am sad not to have been there to give comfort. As my companion says, "See there," pointing to the green valley dividing the urban boroughs to the left of the bottleneck, is where the poorest of the poor live. You will know them by their nearly naked children. And I hear a sudden laughing in the street, where a shirtless boy with a heart in his hand, a heart which is hand-sized, a goat's heart, I think, or perhaps a sheep, comes chasing the joy of his own way home. So I'm missing my beloved Blackhawks, but that's probably a good thing. They're playing tonight, their first game in the final 7 series, and I have this theory that the man in the green chair, which is me, whenever I watch, they lose. I can feel, Patrick Kane when I'm watching him play. He's looking through the TV screen, seeing me in the green chair, and it just kind of drains all the energy out of his playing. So I thought I would read one hockey piece tonight in deference to the fact that I'm missing that game in order to be here. I'm grateful to be here nonetheless. A day that none can take away from my book, You Can Always Eat the Dogs, The Hockeyness of Ordinary Men. This is a short prose piece. In my mind's eye, I have an image of my father's laced-up hockey skates tethered together, hanging from a spike hard hammered into the brick wall in the back shed of the farmhouse where he was born. I wouldn't swear to that location, and I can prove it neither false nor true, because the new owners of the farm have leveled and removed the ruin of the shed and kitchen from the south end of the house that was once our family home. Perhaps they hung from a nail in the outer wall of the horse barn, perhaps over the workbench above the vise beside an over-sharpened hoe. I recall my father skating only once, and on that occasion for the briefest while. It was a good winter day under a cold sun-blue heaven. The farm pond was well and truly frozen over on the surface of the east muck, where the ice shone like a black-backed mirror. My sister and mother were there as well, lacing up their milk-white skates for doing the mitten daub of figure eights. I'm not actually certain that my mother ever skated, but she's there in the fond memory of that nearly perfect day when I was 6 or 7 and full of the impossible joy of being alive in the body when the body first discovers new things. In the big barn there hangs a smock for ghosts. On the silo door, a toxic warning of death behind the wall. The cattle yard is tall with weeds. The top rail of the bull fence sags on rot like a wind-broken branch. The eaves refuse to hold the rain, and the foundation stones have tumbled into rubble at the base. The hay is white with lime, and the empty darkness has no hunger for the light. Those skates my father wore have gone the way of mortal objects into dust, but in memory, as in dream, they remain as real, and I see him skating on a perfect morning long ago, a day we shared that none can take away. So I'm a big Beatle fan. John Tyndall's a big Beatle fan. I remember this night. Not this night. I've forgotten this night already. I remember this night in February 1964 that I'm describing here in a second prose piece. As of early evening, Sunday, February the 9th, 1964, I still had not heard a single word about the Beatles. Somehow, in my isolation, I had not experienced a solitary note of their music, nor had I read a jot or tittle concerning their impending appearance in the Ed Sullivan Show. My bachelor uncle, who lived with us in our house on the farm, knocked on my bedroom door, advising me, "You had better come downstairs and see this," meaning something special was about to occur, something momentous, something I must see. Reluctantly, I joined my mother, father, sister, and uncle in the parlor for the viewing. Ed Sullivan, the necklace, gormless, slick-haired announcer who had already inflicted the weird-mouthed Topo Gigio on an unappreciative generation of children, came on stage to introduce these youngsters from Liverpool, the Beatles. I did not know that my life was about to change, as with the opening strains of All My Love, sung by left-handed bass guitarist Paul McCartney, I woke up. That very moment, on that very evening, I made up my mind to become left-handed. The following morning, I ate my breakfast with a left-handed spoon. At school, I took up my fountain pen in envy of my sinister classmates Murray Bratt and Rick McEachran. I'd taken to wearing my watch in my right hand and gripping my stylograph so the nib blotted the page like the slow and steady drip of blood from a pricked finger. I commenced the careful study of left-handed cursive. I copied notes from the board like a poor learner. The rest of the term I slowed myself down with the shaky cursive of a nervous schoolboy. Like everyone else, I saw myself practicing to be an English rock band, and I would be Paul. I would be the cute one, my left hand waving at a screaming crowd of pixelated girls. So now to the other extreme, I remember waking up and my hair started to grow that very day, and I don't know, as I look around the crowd, I suspect there are people in the room that remember the wedge between generations that went very deep. It was almost as deep as the wedge between races, between fathers and sons, who would not allow their sons to sit at the table with them. This poem is from the book, Burning My Father, and the poem is called Burning My Father, and it is indeed about cremation. But my father decided to be cremated. In other cultures than ours, cremation is not considered such a bad topic. My mother saw the book, she saw the cover, and she said, "What's that mean?" And I told her it was about cremation. She said, "That's an awful title." Burning My Father. After the Beatles, our hairstyles grew biblical and the barbers went broke. As for my father, one evening at supper, he said to me, "If you want to continue putting your feet under my table, you'll go and get a haircut." Meanwhile, at the meeting of the Ladies' Guild, the church women drove my mother to silence over cake crumbs and the money and tea debating the disrespectfulness of long-haired youth. My great-aunt Isabel, wife to the dour and sanctimonious Episcopalian priest, castigated me for having respect for neither God nor country. Men I'd known all my life called me that thing, that hoochie-coochie girl. I saw my bachelor uncle drag a young man into the halter stall at London Fair, where he ran the sheep shears, chattering up his red-scarred scalp, leaving him shorn from nape to crown, using the drunken excuse, long hair scares the cattle. I've always listened well for the ugly laughter of nasty men. My father's hair at the end lashing his forehead, inching over the delicate bone of his nape, fringing his ears, spilling on the hospital pillow slip, feathering the linen like a new plucked angel. My sister, tossing a barn board in with his body, gave the weight of his ashes this additional smoke. Trapped in the grave, beyond the last heartbeat of his being, his complicated love and my forgiveness, given freely, how important it became. And now, a final poem. This one is inspired by my mother, and I'm going through a very strange experience. We writers, many of us can't help but write about what we experience, even if it's not pretty. But it's strange to see my mother vanishing before my very eyes. Just a quick story about her memory. So on our farm we had my grandfather, my grandmother, my uncle, my father, my sister Georgina, and I, and Tom, the hired hand. And so I was talking to my mother, and I said, "Mother, do you know who I am?" And she said, "No, I don't know you." I said, "I'm your son John. Do you remember your husband George?" She said, "I was married?" I said, "Yes, you were married for 60 years. Do you know who George Lee was?" She said, "He was my father." I said, "No, he wasn't your father, he was your husband." "Oh. Do you remember Grandpa Lee?" "No." "Do you remember Grandma Lee and how much you loved her?" "No." "Do you remember Uncle John? You and he fought like war horses all your lives." "No." "Do you remember Tom Malott, the hired man?" Well, who could possibly forget Tom Malott? I was listening to a radio program, and a scientist was on there, and she gave me personally the gift of, as a listener, of the fact that there are moths living in Madagascar that drink the tears of sleeping birds. And I thought, what a beautiful image. So I wrote this poem called Moths That Drink the Tears of Sleeping Birds. My mother's memory hangs on the lip of a word as though the sound of language were blotting its ink as it breathes, and goes backwards black to the blind in a moment blur of night, washing the color away from the world, like windows scrimmed in dyed linen that is indigo dark to the hem, adrift on the sash, like smoke that smudges lantern glass on a wick, foreshortened in fuel, that burned off past of blue gloaming gone gray, that deep into dusk, nocturne, with its stilling of song and voice gone loud on the lake, unavailable sun, unseeable moon, and the misty subsuming of stars. Her mind sees a butterfly on the wall, and she says, "I've never seen a blue butterfly. Have you?" I tell her there are many. The swallowtail, the common blue morpho, the mission blue, the Carner blue, the blue crow, the blue pansy, and more. In Spanish I say, Mariposa azul. In French, Papillon bleu. speaking this meaningless way to a woman I love and was born to. I weep for the loss without tears, the sob in my voice concealed in sweet words. I've learned there are maws that drink the tears of sleeping birds. That lepidopterous thirst in the rainforest dark in the island Madagascar, while the magpie robins dream of songs that will sing in the dawn. Moths slake a desire they long to solve in the salt wells of Morphia. Those soft-winged thieves of weeping, stealing the sorrow from the night. I was wanted one of these French flat books, but I discovered that if there's any moisture in there, they all turn into seagulls. Anyway, Stan said something about questions, or you? Go ahead.
John, thank you very much. And I want to say that while I was listening to you reading, I thought of something somebody said to me recently. It was that a good poem just keeps giving. And I feel like I could have listened to your poems, read them over and over, and then I would have gotten something new out of them every time.
I'm not done yet.
Oh, but they were very, very rich, very complex. It was beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Anybody have a question or comment for John? Yes.
When did you write your first poem?
My very first poem I wrote when I was 8 years old. It was in June of whatever grade you're in. There's a short musician coming up next, I think. A short singer. Anyway. Sabotage. So I was 8 years old, and the teacher put some verses on the board, and we were supposed to copy one of them into our card and make a card. And I didn't like any of the things that were on the board, and I had in mind some phrases that I'd seen on cards. So I wanted to write a card for my father, and the poem was called "To a Friend," but I elided the R. And so the card that I wrote him was called "To a Fiend," and he kept it all his life, and kept showing. And I drew a television on it as well, and taped a nickel inside because I knew you're supposed to give something for a card. So that's the very first poem I wrote, and then I didn't write another poem until I saw the Beatles on television, and that got me started. And I was in grade 7, so I'd be 12 when I started writing. I wrote a whole series of very bad Ringo Pingo-ish adoration of the Beatles.
Okay. Anyone else? You are very funny, John. Not only rich and complex, but funny, haha. Any other questions or comments for John? Come on, guys. Questions, comments? Yeah.
On the back of one of the books that you read from was the line, I think, I owe my sanity to the fact that I was the son of a farmer. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what it was being the son of a farmer that resulted in your sanity.
Okay, so if you just want to repeat that line, John.
Sure, I owe my sanity to being the son of a farmer. That was a misquotation by the students. I actually said it's memory that keeps us sane. And so I think, and now that I'm watching my mother's memory disappear, I don't think that she's gone insane. So I'm not sure that I'm right about that, but she is vanishing from her life. But someone once said that memory is memory that keeps us sane. And the wonderful thing about growing up on a farm, I didn't grow up in a city, so I don't know what that's like. I think I can imagine what that's like more easily than a city child can imagine what it's like growing up on a farm. Because by the time I was 8, I'd seen sex and death and participated in all kinds of things that are daily occurrences. And so in this day and age where the zeitgeist of the journalistic world seems to be dumbing it down and dumbing it down and dumbing it down, and political correctness comes to the fore, and all of those things that are happening, I have such a rich bed of and variety of experience that I'm not a sucker for for the shallow lies that are being spoken aloud without anybody, investigating them and so on. So maybe that's what I'm grateful for. And the rhythms of the seasons. I remember Margaret Avison at the end of her life. She wasn't a farm girl, but she at the end of her life, she was mostly blind. She was mostly crippled. She wrote 2 of the best books of poems that she'd written in her entire life. She won the Governor General's Award and the Tilden Award for one of those 2 books. And in a postcard, she said to me, not complaining about what she'd lost, she said, "At least I still have my daily skies." And so growing up on the farm where you're close to nature, probably not as close to nature as somebody who lives in the wilderness, but you're very close to nature. It keeps you respectful of life, especially when you see so much death on a farm. It's very, very common. By the time I was 10, I'd buried lots of animals. I participated in the slaughter of some, and I'd experienced the death of human beings as well. So maybe it's that you actually experience those things firsthand, and you're reminded of the importance of being alive and the need to worship things that went before you, to honor things that went before you. John mentioned 5 generations. That's a really great privilege to have a sense that that my great-grandfather, who died in 1865, his picture was on the wall in my house. And to have the sense of the presence of absence, that's all part of being on a farm.
Okay, I have a question. I'm always interested in the artist and the process. So not only the final product, but how the writer or the artist comes to that. And it was pretty clear, John, from what you read, what inspires you. But what I'd like to know is, how do you write? Like, is there a time of day? Is there a place? Do you write it all at once and it just comes out like that? Do you edit very much? So just something about the process for you.
It mostly just comes out, and what I look for is a first line. As I said, when I was traveling in Peru, I thought, I feel really like I was inspired by the landscape, but not inspired to write, just inspired to be present and walk around and look at things and think about them, and I didn't think I would write about it. And then I came home, and the first lines just kept coming, and I paid attention to that. Neil Young said a very interesting thing, and he's a very prolific person, a prolific songwriter. He said his job is to be present when the songs come, and not let anything get in the way. And that's sort of my process. I try to stay out of the way and get out of the way. When I sit down at my desk, I usually have no idea what I'm going to write about that day, and I just try to trick my mind into a first line, and then the poem comes out as a surprise.
Well, it's working for you. Okay. So do we have another couple of final questions for John? Yes.
Do you ever write love poetry?
Yes, I think every poem that I write is a love poem. Dylan Thomas said something, and I'm a big fan of Dylan Thomas, and I read his collected poems when I was about 17. And he said of his poetry, I paraphrase, that my poetry is in celebration of man and God, and I'd be a damn fool if it wasn't. So I think every poem that I write is a love poem. If you mean by love poetry, romantic poetry of romantic love, yes, of course. And I've been very fortunate to have met the right person, and I write about her when I'm inspired to do so. There's a question over there.
Okay, one more question.
Does Mr. Know-It-All have a riddle for us?
Sure, I have a riddle for you. And you have to understand, Brian, I was in Brian's English class a number of times, and sometimes to kill time at the beginning of class, when people were just coming in and sitting down, I would say to the students, okay, let's not waste any time. I'm here. My name is Mr. Know-It-All. You have to stump me with a question. And it can't be, you know, what is the speed of light? It has to be something that I can answer. So why is the sky blue? You know, some question that you might have. So here's a riddle for you. And Mark, you're disqualified. I'll tell you what. The first person that hasn't heard this before and comes up to me and gives me the answer, I'll sign a book and give it to you as a gift. A book of your choice, except for the really expensive one over there. And you might even talk me into that one, but you'd have to be really, really. Anyway, here's the riddle. The teeth of the lion are eaten by the lamb. The teeth of the lion are eaten by the lamb.
You just have to be bilingual.
You got it already?
Sure.
Okay. So you gotta tell me privately.
Okay.
But I'll come to you first, and then I'm going to go over there, and I think there's going to be a break now. And oh, not yet? Okay, so I'll give you the microphone.
Okay. Thank you again, John. A round of applause.